Hello, community. Welcome. My name is Catherine Jura. I am a community health educator, and I am the creator of this podcast. I created Hello Community in response to the current epidemic of social isolation and loneliness that is being reported across the globe and the United States. On average, 1 out of every 2 Americans says they are lonely. And prolonged loneliness can lead to physical and mental illness. It can make chronic illnesses worse, and it can lead to early death. The good news, the hopeful news, is that creating social connection and community are significant healing factors in this epidemic. So my guests will be sharing their stories of creating social connection and community for themselves. So I'd like you to meet my guest for today, which is Ellen Cosgrove. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Yeah, I often share with our listeners and our viewers how I met my guest. And so Ellen wrote an article for a local magazine, and I had to meet Ellen. And so she had her email on there, and I reached out to her, and I said, I would love to meet you. I have this podcast. And so we met and talked for hours. Could have talked for more hours if Ellen didn't have anyone else behind her. And she agreed to be on this podcast. And Ellen is my first guest that is bringing both personal and professional experience to this conversation. So Ellen is a trauma-informed facilitator, maybe we'll have you explain what that means, with over 15 years experience in community building and conflict resolution, as well as a master's in coexistence and conflict. She runs a community building consultancy called Community in Context, and a dialogue project called Dinner and Dialogue, which we will for sure talk about. And then we'll guide folks on how they can find you at the end. Mm-hmm. Okay? So why don't we start with your personal story, because that's kind of what leads to your professional story. Mm-hmm. So where would you like to begin?
Where to begin? I mean, yeah, I think I'm someone who was lucky enough to grow up with a lot of community around me. I have a really big family, which of course is wonderful and has its challenges at times. And so I think to me, community is very natural. But I think there's been, and I was lucky to kind of grow up in a very diverse community. I went to a really big high school with people from all over the world, very diverse. That I think I saw that it was through certain activities, through sports, through clubs. For me, it was basketball, right, where I was able to really connect with girls and kids from different backgrounds than myself. So I think I saw early that you could connect over difference through activities and through getting to know people and through being in a situation where people were allowed to kind of take their masks down and show their humanity. And so I've always been fascinated in other cultures and food. I've been a lifelong eater.
How unusual.
Yeah. And I think, found a lot of curiosity through food, that was kind of how I like learned about the world. I studied abroad for the first time. First time I left the country was when I was 20, and I studied abroad in Italy, and that was an incredible experience for me. It was just so wonderful. And when I graduated, I went to Fordham University. I was an urban studies major and communications major, and then I was working in advertising, which was, a really good job. It was a really good experience, but I knew I wanted to do something that I believed in. I knew I wanted to potentially live abroad again. I think I really loved that experience. So I got an opportunity to work for an organization called Peace Players, and at 25, I moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland, and worked for an organization that used basketball as a way to bring kids together in this divided post-conflict society. And it was there that I really just learned so much about kind of humans, what humans do when humans get together, right? Which we seem to find different groups, right? And decide that that this group is better than this group, or just the kind of the unending kind of intergroup dynamics that humans have that have played over for centuries, but also play over in our lives. So I think going there and sort of seeing the conflict there and learning about the conflict, but also seeing people who have every reason to dislike, to have like some real deep dislike for each other, connect and have human experiences, I think made me realize that it was possible, right? And so I went to grad school for that. I went to grad school at Brandeis University. I studied coexistence and conflict, which I know is a mouthful. I can't even say it. And that too was an incredible experience because I got to study that with people from all over the world, people who, from all different cultures. And, in class, I learned so much from my colleagues, but we used to have these potlucks. We had this one potluck at Thanksgiving where everyone brought a dish from their culture, from their tradition, from their family, right? And everyone around and kind of went around and explained this dish. And it was there that I was like, wow, like food, like I always loved food, obviously, and it was my connector, but to see that like food really kind of like unlocked this door to people's like, to their story in a way that was different, right? In a way that was different than just like having a normal conversation or what we were talking about in class. And so that stuck with me for a while. And I graduated, I went on to work for several nonprofits. I moved back to New York City. But I always kind of had this like food idea in my head. And in 2000, the 2016 election, there was I could see that we were getting pulled further and further apart, and we weren't able sort of to have conversations anymore. And so in 2018, I decided to start a dialogue project out of I really started as an experiment. That's why I didn't call it a dialogue project. And initially I was like, I'm going to start an experiment. And I emailed my community and was like, who wants to try this with me? And it was just the idea of kind of like bringing people together over food. And the original model was I wrote around a theme, and then people brought a dish that kind of like associated that theme for them. So the first theme was comfort, right? So people brought a comfort food with them to share. And then we all sat around a table and we ate those foods together, and then I facilitated a discussion where the first question was, what is your comfort food? And why? And then people explained, the story of the food that we were sharing together. But then we also got to talk about, what else people did to comfort themselves. And then also we got into, a more in-depth conversation of like how important it is to be uncomfortable. So since doing that, I've taken that model and kind of brought it to different communities, and I started a consultancy a few years ago, and I'm working with different nonprofits and corporate communities right now, doing that model and other models, all about like bringing people together.
So when you come together with a group, what is your goal? Is your goal to sort of get everyone to talk together, talk to each other? Like if you're hired by a company to come in and do a community building activity, what expectation do you bring can happen in a one event, community building day event at work?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like you're not going to change every dynamic, right, by going in once. And I think obviously each organization, each project has like a different goal, but for like a one-off session, I think my goal is really to have people listen.
Interesting.
I think that is the most important thing you can do, right? And that as a facilitator and kind of creating a model where I'm like, okay, yes, this is about you sharing your story, but more importantly, this is about you listening to the people that you work with or the people that you see. Or if it's a situation where people are meeting people the first time, right? Like I think for me, it's encouraging people to listen. Is the biggest goal, because you can't control other people, but I do think you can create circumstances that bring out the best in an interaction, I think. And I think also kind of like going in there and being clear about like the boundaries and being clear that this is like a respectful space where we're encouraging people to listen and also to be open to hearing a new perspective, hearing a perspective from that they may not have thought about before, because obviously no matter what, everyone's coming from very different life experiences.
So since you've studied all this, how do you envision listening? It sort of sounds like an oxymoron to building community. Like, what does the listening part, like when I think of community, I think of people sharing. And you're saying, first off, especially in a one-off event at work, listen. What is it about the listening?
I think it's something that we've forgotten how to do a little bit. I think when we meet people, or even when you're in a situation, I mean, I do this too, right? Where you focus a lot on what you're going to say next, and you are not really listening to other people. I think we do that kind of naturally because we get nervous, right? We get nervous about what we're going to say. I remember in class,
we start talking.
Yeah, right. And we just talk and talk and talk. And so I think listening allows the other person to be heard. And I think also there's maybe nothing. Maybe not. That's not true. I just think it's very powerful to be listened to. So I think it's a twofold thing. I think when you actually listen to someone, you really like hear them, and I think are then able to respond in a way that really does build that relationship, but builds it maybe in a deeper way.
A deeper
connection.
A
deeper connection. And also I think being listened to, which you have to take turns, right? If you're going to listen, then you're also going to be listened to, right? If you listen to, then you will be listened. Yeah. So I think that it kind of creates this like mutual connection. Yeah. For I think maybe like a deeper, more authentic connection versus just kind of like talking at each other. Believe me, I know how to talk, so I can do that. But it's something I kind of like have to remind myself of as around listening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah, okay.
And
it's
so,
a good question though.
Well, it just popped into my mind. And so, and then your ongoing, let's back up to the Surgeon General's report and talk about, for a minute, the Surgeon General released an advisory in 2023 on the epidemic of social isolation and loneliness, and that connection and community is a significant healing factor in this epidemic. And so I know that you talk about that in some of the stuff you've written and I have read. So is that at play for you when you go into an organization? Is that at play for you that so many people are lonely when you're thinking about developing an event for an organization? Absolutely. And I think, I mean, all of us our lives were affected by COVID, right? Like I think that, but I think this also, what was interesting about that data is that this has been happening since before COVID. Way before COVID. Yeah, and I think that was really interesting to see. I thought so also. But I think everyone has a moment in COVID where like they weren't able to gather with people that they loved or gather with their friends in the same way, right? So we were like literally pulled apart. And I think I even see this in my life, building back my communities, right? Building back the way I used to hang out with people or celebrate with people. It's taken some time, right? It's taken some time because I think we all were affected by it. But I think when it comes to doing events, I think it's just that what I see is people are a little bit more afraid of each other. And so I think, and even at work, like yes, people talk to each other, they get to know each other, but they usually only have like one interaction or an interaction around work, right? They don't get to, especially now when like a lot of people are working hybrid or they're working remote, right? Which is great and wonderful for, it's like in some ways a great change with work, but it does kind of like take a toll on the relationships you have with the people that you work with. Like you just don't get to know people as well. So I think a lot of like what I'm doing with people is like giving them a different experience with each other, right? At work. Yeah, where they actually get to like learn about each other in a different way. And I would say like, it's also something like I've done it with, people that are family members before they've come to a thing, and I've done one outside of work, more of a community-based one, and people learn things about each other that they wouldn't know. I mean, for the ones I used to do when I first started, my parents used to come to them, and I learned things about my parents that I never had heard before, right? Because we've never had that kind of conversation. But also I think it's an interesting thing to be able to learn about people that you meet for the first time too. And learn that you have this like connection with someone like over like something you wouldn't think that someone else liked through this one. So I think it's like kind of like a situation I think where it sort of shows the similarities we have with people in our life or even strangers we're meeting that night, but also it's a space where
we can be a little bit more curious, and we can kind of like see the differences that are there as not threatening, but actually really interesting.
Whether it's a work event you've put together or something out in the community.
More community-based, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and kind of be allowed to see, I think, that like the differences, like how cool it is that these people are different than us, right? Like, because how boring would the world be if everyone was the same, right?
Well, and you brought up something interesting in one of our conversations about loneliness is not you do it, you come to understand yourself, and you're never lonely again. It is a forever happening event in our lives. And as the doctor who wrote the advisory said, this has been going on for a very long time. Loneliness, social isolation and loneliness. COVID just really brought it to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And so you had mentioned how your experience is that your personal and your professional experiences were always sort of starting over with the getting used to a new something, a new church, a new job, a new neighborhood, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my own like personal experience with loneliness, I mean, I would say it's very human. We've all experienced it, right? Like, I think growing up, though I had a huge family, there were obviously moments when I felt a little bit isolated or felt like I couldn't connect. I was a shy little kid, and I think I was lucky enough to get into sports. And I think sports really helped create sort of like a sense of belonging with the teams I was on as I grew up. But I think I remember when I first moved to Belfast when I was 25 years old, it's the first time I'd ever like lived in a place. I guess I lived in Rome, but there, when I studied abroad, everyone was there looking for friends, right? It was like we were all in the same boat. It was this short-term thing, everyone was looking for friends. So in some ways, that was an incredible experience of belonging. But when I moved to Belfast, right, like, yes, I had coworkers, yes, I met people, but like, it's the first time I'd really been in a situation where I had to really like go it alone, and I really, like, I was in a country without any family, and I felt it. I felt those moments of really not knowing exactly what to do, like having to work to build friends, right, in a way that I never quite had to do before, and having moments where like there was I remember there'd be entire weekends where I wouldn't see anyone, right, because everyone would leave Belfast and go home to their families. And I finally got someone to bring me home. I was like, all right, can I come home? But I had to ask, right? It was very vulnerable.
Interesting. You asked to go home with someone because you had it with being alone on the weekends.
Yeah.
And you asked someone if you could go home with them.
So it's incredibly vulnerable. I think also like even admitting you're lonely there's some shame around it, right? Because we don't want to tell anyone we're lonely, right? We want everyone to believe we have
together.
It all together. We have a wonderful social life, like everything is going fine. But I think, every single human has experienced loneliness. Like even I lived in New York City for a lot of my adult life, and that, even though it's a place full of people, can be an incredibly isolating and lonely place, at times.
And why? Why, Ellen? Or why was it for you?
I think it's just sometimes it's hard to, like, it's a place where you have to meet people out, right? And like usually your friends live far away. Like there's not as much like community in a neighborhood, I would say, right? And so it's just harder to sometimes make plans, and harder to kind of have those like more spontaneous hangs instead of like you have to like plan something months in advance kind of thing. I was lucky that the last place I lived in New York in Brooklyn, I built a lot of community in my neighborhood, and that was mostly through the CSA I belong to, which is Community Supported Agriculture.
Yes.
So again, it was food, right?
Yes.
That allowed me to really meet a lot of people.
Interesting.
But then I moved upstate during COVID, and I'm still like, all right, I'm 42 years old and I'm making friends again, right? And that it takes effort, it takes time. You have to like be tenacious about it, right? Because people are busy, people have kids, people have partners, right? When we were 20, it was easier to make friends because everyone had more time. In your 40s, people don't have as much time. So I just think it's like a muscle and a skill set that we constantly have to sort of like build up. Because also, even if you're in a community and you take it for granted and you don't put effort into it, then it's not going to last, right? So I think it's just a thing we constantly have to deal with. And also, kind of understanding that, like, you know, I'm an introvert, so as much as I love being around people, there's also moments when I need to be away from people, and kind of balancing that too. Like, what is, you know, time alone that's really good for you, and what's time alone that's harmful for you? When do you need to connect? When do you need to come out? And I find, and yeah, so I just think that there's a lot there, but I think it's never something that's ever going to be perfect. I just think it's always going to be something we have to work at.
I think that is just so important to share.
Yeah.
You know, that it's a vulnerable thing to put ourselves out when we don't know someone. Loneliness is common, just
it's human.
because we're
it's part
human.
of being human.
It's because we're human.
Yeah.
And we have to work at it. We have to work at it.
Yeah, it takes effort.
Yeah, I really appreciated your sharing that when we've talked. Another thing that you shared that I found really interesting was that you cannot be curious and fearful at the same time. And so when you talk about whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, all these people, I don't know anybody, that feels kind of scary. Where am I going to sit? Who am I going to sit with? What are we going to talk about? But if you put the spin on it of coming into it with just, hey, I'm going to come in be curious, just saying it makes me feel different when I think about being curious versus, who am I going to sit with when it's time to eat?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that? I think that's a really beautiful thing you said.
Yeah, I mean,
and to think about.
I definitely did not make that up. That is, you know, that was someone else's research that I don't know the name. So I don't want to take credit for that. But I do think it showed up a lot with my mom. My mom is a retired science teacher. And so it was cool. I grew up with, you know, science being the norm, right? And she's such a lover of learning. She's so curious. And I remember, you know, like, I don't love spiders. I'm not a huge spider fan. But my mom, like, the way she looks at, like, spiders and, like, insects or, like, anything that sometimes nature can be really gross, right? But she just, like, gets so curious about it. I remember her telling me that, being like, well, when I'm curious about it, I'm not afraid.
Interesting.
Right? And I was like, that's such an interesting way of thinking about it. But then I actually looked it up, and there is data around it that says, like, your brain cannot be curious and fearful at the same time. And so it's just a switch. I mean, obviously, like, there are moments when you should have fear, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like,
yes.
you know what I mean? Like, I'm not telling anyone to go into a situation where, you know, that's harmful for them. You know what I mean?
Potentially harmful. No,
exactly.
That's a good,
you know, but I think it's so easy, especially after COVID. I noticed this with myself, that I would be just more fearful about going into social situations, right? A little bit more nervous about meeting new people, right? And when I made it less about myself and made it more about learning about someone, right? Which, again, whereas, like, listening comes in. Because I think we always think, like, I got to go say the perfect thing.
Yes.
Right? And
yes.
like, I'm never going to say the perfect thing, right? I can talk a lot, but but if it's more about kind of, like, asking curious questions and getting to know somebody else, I mean, people love to talk about themselves, right? So I think, yeah, just being, and that's where I think we're, like, food is one way, right? Like, there's so many ways to do it, but one of the reasons why I start so many of my programs off with, like, a story about a food is because it's an approachable way. First of all, people feel more comfortable sharing that, right? Like, okay, I can talk about food, right? And most people have a story, but it also allows the people listening to engage in a different way, because they're like, oh, really? Like, you know, there might be someone you saw in that program that's maybe a little bit intimidating, right? And then you hear that he likes macaroni and cheese, and you're like, cool. You know what I mean? So it just, like, it humanizes people. So I think that's true. I think, like, when we can be curious, ask those questions, it, like, not only kind of, like, makes that person feel seen, but also I think it makes us more comfortable to be with them, right? Because all of a sudden they're just like us, right? They're humans.
That's a fabulous point. Yeah, if we think about when we become intimidated, how unsettling that can be, and that is the opposite of a setup to connect.
Yeah, of course.
And you're starting with your food and dialogue program. Is I love the stories that you've told. When you start with just, and you said, bringing curiosity and food together. So you just start with a simple question of, the topic is comfort food. So tell us a story about the comfort food. And then someone could say, well, this was my grandmother's favorite Mashed potatoes.
Yeah, mashed
My
potatoes. It doesn't
grandmother's-
even matter what it is.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
beauty of it. Does not. It could be potato chips.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah. This was my grandmother's. And then the person probably tears up and says something about their grandmother. And then you've already seen a very sweet side of someone about their grandmother. In the first sort of unvulnerable question, from my perspective, you know, what about this food? What story goes with this food?
Yeah.
But how quickly we can share something very deeply about ourselves.
Yeah.
And then, Ellen, did you say, and would this be the same across the board, whatever program you set up, depending on the response of the group, informs your next round of questions?
Yeah, I come prepared with a bunch of questions. But yeah, then I usually, depending on kind of like how it's going, pick one or the other. So yeah,
You mean whether you have a group that is kind of sharing at a more vulnerable level or a more superficial level, you don't push that.
Absolutely
You sort of go with another lighter topic for the second round of questions.
Yeah, I always make sure too to like be really clear that I only want people to share what they're comfortable sharing, right? There's no pressure to go deep, you know, there's no pressure to share anything, you know, like that you don't feel comfortable sharing. And I think that's really important. But also I would say what's very interesting about humans is once someone does share something, you find that people want to share something deeper as well. And I think like that, I've been a little surprised by that, right? If you kind of create space where people do feel comfortable, you know, people will open up, right? And that has, it's been such a privilege in many ways, right? To be able to kind of witness people and their stories.
We're hardwired to belong. And so that to me matches what you're saying, that if people are given just a safe, comfortable opening, sometimes a lot of people will. But it's the creating the safety or the environment that allows that to come forward.
Yeah, and
know?
I think also safe space is like, it's tough because no space is ever completely safe. And I think like it's always a risk, right? And that's, I think, part of connection, part of community, part of being with people. There's always a risk there.
A risk of?
I mean, I wouldn't say anything like, but just there's always a risk of maybe getting hurt, or maybe, you know, like with friendship, with relationships, with love, with dating, right? I'm dating right now, and as much as there's the hope that, like, you know, I will find a partner, there's always a risk, right, to going on a date too, and maybe having a disappointment. So I guess I just think that that's important too. Like of course, like I think safe space is wonderful, but just to know that, like, of course, like this is why you are a little bit scared to do it. Like there, of course, there's always a risk, you know? And so I think I like to say that it's like, it's brave space, right? And that's like, those are the spaces, right, that are really incredible, because they're not always going to be perfectly comfortable. I think that's it, you know? Because I think talking about the stuff that's really going on in society is not always comfortable, but it doesn't mean we don't need to be there, you know? And so I guess that's the switch, right? Like, because yes, we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and comes together, but also to have these real discussions. And I think the discussions that probably are the most satisfying are not always super comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, social isolation and loneliness and connection and community for you. They've been, seems like, most of your life. You've been working out in one version or another. So, any other thoughts that come to mind? Just throwing that out.
I think so much of what I've learned about humans, and I think the only way I can kind of make sense of, you know, like when you learn about conflict, when you learn about genocide, when you learn about sort of like the most terrible things that we've done to one another, is it all comes back to dehumanization. And that's a big word. I know people, like, it's like thrown around a lot, like, but it's really, like, I think my biggest thing is, how do we create spaces that, like, where people are, like, just able to see each other's humanity. And I think, like, I think it's just part of, like, making it easier to live, right? Like, it's hard to take in everyone's humanity all the time, right? We gotta, like, get to work. We gotta, like, drop our kids off at school, right? We don't have time, I think, to, like, really take in everyone's humanity all the time. But I think it's just noticing that's like very natural, like even at work, right? Like say you have one experience with this one person and you mostly only email and they're usually asking you for something that's annoying, right? Like you're like, without even meaning to it, you're like dehumanizing this person a little bit just because like it's like uncomfortable, it's annoying, right? But then if you could have like a conversation with this person and realize like, oh, like this guy's really nice, and like, oh, actually like that, when he said that to me that one time, his mom has cancer or something, like he's going through a lot, And so I guess I just think like constantly sort of like asking yourself, like, how do I like humanize this person in front of me? And you could, I think the way to do that is by asking like really simple, curious questions. And I guess that's the thing I would like leave people with really is just like, challenging yourself, right? To like really, like, how do I have a human connection with this person? Whether it's like someone you're standing in line next to, whether it's your partner, your child, maybe like your uncle who you don't agree with politically, which I know the holidays, it gets kind of dicey sometimes, to even just like the person you're like, who's checking you out. Like, because I do think like you'll be surprised how much joy you get from these like little interactions.
Yeah, we have had a few guests. I had an 8-year-old say in the last podcast we did, community is everywhere for me. And he's 8.
Wise 8-year-old.
Yeah. And I found that really astounding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that whole, there's the dehumanization of each other. I really liked what you just said. If you can just ask a simple question, say someone has a button on them, you could ask about the button, or their earrings are pretty, or they got on a t-shirt that says something or other. I actually read somewhere that if you want to start conversations with people, wear t-shirts that have something on them. And it gives people something to say to each other, like, oh, I'm a Mets fan too, or yeah, that organization's really cool, and away you go.
Yeah, because I think you will be surprised that like pretty much everyone you meet, you can find something you have in common with them.
But the hard part, I think, is the getting started, and that's what I love about if you just walk around in a curious headset instead of, gosh, what will I say that will be fascinating, or what would my opening line be, or any of those things that we do, instead of looking for something curiously, the person, anything about the person that you could say, even if you're standing, I never thought about this, but even if you're standing in line at the store, you could say, I really like this store. Do you come here often? I mean, that sounds so simple, but
it almost doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
My sister always makes fun of me because whenever we go out to eat, I always say something to the server. Like I always like, and it's like now it's just an instinct where I'm like, oh, nice earrings, or like, oh, like I like, because I think when I did a lot of serving in my days, and like it made such a difference when people like looked me in the eyes and asked me about myself.
Humanized you.
Yeah, because automatically I was like, oh, this person sees me, right? This person isn't going to treat me like, like I'm below them for their time here. And so I always like make a point to just be like, hello, I see you. And like, nice earrings. And it really is incredible. Like, get better service. Not only get better service, but like it just like helps that person relax, helps that person know that you see them as a human.
And it almost sounds like this is how you walk in the world now.
I mean, I am not perfect, but yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, it makes the world more enjoyable, right? Because I think, like, not saying you don't have to, not saying, of course, like, there's moments you have to be assertive, and of course, there's moments when, like, it's not safe to be there. And of course, you have to, I also work with formerly homeless people and people in addiction and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of, times you do have to, be careful, I guess. But mostly I found that like when you're kind and curious to people, they return it right back to you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So in terms of folks getting a hold of you, you have 2 different ways that you're working in the world right now. Would you like to share with our viewers how they could find you to either facilitate a dinner and dialogue event or your business?
You could go to my website which is www.communityincontext.com.
Community
in context. Yes, right there you can just email me through the website. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And community and context, what would someone be reaching out to you to do through that part of your work?
Like my main program is a team building program called Lunch Pods that I do with different teams. I also put together trainings for different teams. And I also am a facilitator. Like I do a lot of just like facilitation for like strategic planning, or really any training you want, on the side. But team building and trust building, initiatives within kind of workplace communities are my main programming.
And then the dinner and dialogue. I know that you've had an ongoing dinner and dialogue at the Honest Weight Food Co-op. Is that going to continue?
I think so. I think we'll probably continue to offer them like quarterly but definitely reach out on my website. I'll update that.
Oh, that'll be on your website also.
Yep.
Okay. And that's how often?
We haven't planned it for the next year
Going
yet.
forward.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it'd probably be like something quarterly, like a quarterly thing. Yeah.
And I thought of this when we've talked about this. I thought about how could I do a version of this at my next little dinner party, and you come in and do it as a professional. But I just love the idea of just putting a little different spin on a dinner party, with just starting with, okay, there's a theme. Usually people ask, can I bring something? Have them all bring something that's a comfort food, or pick another word, and then just start like you did. Like, what's your story behind the comfort food?
I mean, just even asking people like at Thanksgiving, like what their favorite side is, right? Like
Oh,
people will
God,
tell
that's
you,
so simple, but
right?
that's really interesting,
Or like
yeah.
what's like your favorite holiday dish, like right? Like what's the holiday dish you're looking forward to eating at Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas? Like what's like very simple, right? And I think people think like, oh, that's so cheesy, right? But like, it's approachable, right? It's a question that a lot of people have an answer to. And also, I'm someone, it's tough that, like, when people say, like, what's your favorite food? I don't have a favorite food, right? Like, I love so many foods, and my mind goes blank, and I don't have an answer. But, but I can tell you a food that I like today, So, so I think it's also don't get too bogged down in having, like, a perfect answer for those questions, right? It's just about, people are just curious and they want to get to know you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That theme you just keep repeating over and over, just sort of let go of the perfect question and the perfect answer and just speak in the moment.
Yeah, because actually authenticity is not perfect. And I think we think that we need to be perfect in order to have relationships, in order to be loved, right? But really, who wants to be around a perfect person, right? So
that's a great ending. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Oh,
wonderful.
indeed. And if you would like further support online, you can check out Project Unlonely. Dr. Jeremy Nobel started Project Unlonely, and there's a lot of information about creating connection and community, and they have this really cool library of very short animated films, a couple of minutes, addressing a loneliness situation you might find yourself in, and some thoughts about how to move through that. But it's all done through an animated little story. It's great. And if you found this podcast helpful, please do subscribe, and please do share the link with others so that together we can create a world where everyone feels social connection and community. Till next time. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare professional or mental health provider for any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern.